Welcome to the Cognitive Crucible, produced by the Information Professionals Association. Our website is information-professionals.org, where you can find links and information about today's conversation and get access to members-only content. Join John Bicknell and explore all aspects of our generational challenge, cognitive security.
This is John Bicknell reminding Cognitive Crucible listeners that this Thursday at 12 o'clock East Coast United States time or 11 o'clock Central United States time, there will be a virtual panel on combating disinformation in a competitive information environment. To find out more information, go to our website, information-professionals.org/events, where you can find out more information and a link to register for the event. And while you're there, go ahead and consider joining the Information Professionals Association and being part of our whole of society and whole of government effort to tackle our generational challenge, cognitive security. My guest today on the Cognitive Crucible is Johannes Tammekänd, who is the CEO and co-founder of Sentinel, an Estonian-based startup which helps democratic governments, defense agencies, and internal media counter the threat of deepfakes through an AI-based detection and exercise platform. Johannes previously worked in the NATO Cooperative Cyber Defense Center of Excellence as a cybersecurity expert and architected deep learning systems for Payload-Security, which he exited to CrowdStrike. Johannes, welcome to the Cognitive Crucible.
Hi, John. It's a pleasure.
So deepfakes is something I can safely say very few people had heard of, even as little as maybe just a year ago. But in the last year, this technology has really started to come into everybody's daily lexicon, or we've been hearing more and more about deepfakes. I'd like to start out first by zooming way out to the big global peer competition level, and just ask you for your opinion on what's at stake here, and how do deepfakes fit into the bigger picture of geopolitical struggle?
If you look at history and what has happened to information, then there are two key factors. One being that information production has gone cheaper and quicker, and second, its sharing has gone quicker, easier, and on a mass scale. Now, everything that with Gutenberg book press, radio, TV, internet, and social media. And what is fundamental drivers at the moment is happening in the AI industry is generative AI, meaning that the information that we consume as humans in an information environment doesn't have to be produced by another human anymore, but it can be produced by an AI that includes text, that includes video such as deepfakes, audio, images, and we're seeing the convergence of them. Now, what does it on a global scale mean is that in the information environment, imagine if you're sitting behind a computer, you're the information receiver or producer, and now you have to compete with another AI. And it will be even harder to understand if you are actually speaking or communicating or the information is coming from another human. So it will be play as a sort of an explosion to the sort of the corrupted information environment that we already are living in.
I see. That's great. So I'm hoping that you can tell our audience a little bit more about the technology which goes into producing deep fakes? And then I'd like to also start getting into the kinds of things that you're doing as far as detecting deep fakes. So maybe let's start on the beginning of that. What is the technology that goes into actually producing these things? And it would also be great if you could maybe give a little bit of a history behind that technology and how deepfakes got to where they are today.
If you look at what has Hollywood done in the sort of the last few decades, then they have also basically used CGI to swap faces. Most likely, a lot of us know about the case in Fast and Furious, a Hollywood movie, where one of the
Yeah.
lead actors died, and his brother filmed with his brother and basically used CGI to do that face. Now that cost a lot of money, millions of dollars to pull it off. And now comes 2014, and something called cans are basically invented. So, and what cans are basically is two AI models are competing against each other. So one is trying to, in the case of deepfakes, one is trying to create realistically looking images, and another one is trying to detect if those images are realistic or not. It's basically like if you imagine a criminal forging money and the police trying to detect that, and police with every feedback loop telling to the criminal if that dollar is real or not. And there is this kind of a feedback loop. And so there's the, and now today, there is multiple ways of generating deepfakes. Two main ones are cans. Secondly, the autoencoders, and third one, which isn't so popular anymore, but is graphical-based impressions. And sort of a threat landscape, what it means is that we can model it very similar to the sort of cybersecurity world, meaning on one end you have low-grade actors, script kiddies, or they can basically download malware, repurpose them a little bit, and send them as a payload. And on the other side, you have near peers as nation states. And basically the same applies to deepfakes as well, meaning today, if you look at what is the US number one entertainment app in the Apple App Store, then it is, or at least a few weeks ago, it was not TikTok anymore, but it was Reface app, meaning any consumer could download the app, take a selfie of him or her, and create a deepfake. And that's a sort of it definitely doesn't fool a human, but it is that even with as an end consumer app, it is very easy to produce. And on the other side, basically, you have generating new kind of methods, algorithms to avoid detection by nation states. And in the middle, you have people who know a little bit of IT, have a GPU, can download the repository from GitHub as an open source, and with a few days spin up very realistically looking deepfake. So that there is this sort of spectrum that we have to look at and operate in.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks for that recap. A common theme with technology in general is, when technology is new, it tends to have very few people who know how to use it. It tends to be very expensive. This is what you were describing, I think, as Hollywood or film producers using very expensive CGI, maybe 10 or more years ago. It was expensive. It had varying quality. Sometimes it was done very well. Sometimes audiences would look at the CGI and say, that's stupid. I don't like it. But you come forward 10 years and the technology is much cheaper. It's much more widely available and easy to use. And that's what you were describing, I think, with the Reface app. There are more sophisticated deep fake creation platforms, but the Reface app, anybody can use, and it does a pretty good job of creating images which are fake, but also difficult to detect with the naked eye.
Exactly. And sort of, it's also a question about, why should we care? And it is fundamentally that we process visual compared to text totally differently. So, for example, if we were hunter-gatherers sitting behind a fire, then, and I looked into your eyes, then my brain told to me that's real. But a text compared to that is a fairly new, sort of a technological innovation, or not technological, but still an innovation. And at the moment, 80% of information is visual in the online environment. So even if people actually know, even that some video is a deepfake, then it still has subconscious and conscious effects on a person. So there's one case with an Indian journalist who sort of found out that there's a ring of pedophiles abusing children. She came up with that, sort of wrote the story, blew the story, and after that, few days, she got obviously doxxed. She got hit by a disinformation campaign, and also people looked at it as it was real. And when she saw it, even though she knew that it wasn't real, it had a very big psychological effect on her. She basically came away from her job, locked her up for many months. It was as a sort of a stress roller coaster for her.
Yeah, I can imagine that's tragic, and sadly, there are other examples of that kind of activity happening all the time. So the term deep fake is, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but it is a mashup of the word fake, which means not real, but also using a AI term for deep learning. Could you tell our audience a little bit more about what deep learning is and how deep learning contributes to creating deep fakes? And I think maybe we can start transitioning a little bit into how you are using deep learning as well in order to identify and counter the deep fake threat.
The analogy I usually bring is if we look at software 1.0, meaning we write, as developers, write a bunch of rules, give the data to the rules, and as an output are looking for some kind of information from there. So that's sort of a, let's say, if you want to detect from images, if it's a cat or dog, then with the regular software program, you basically try to look at different kind of features from there. For example, is the maybe cat is a little bit smaller, so you look at, okay, if the sort of the pixels there are smaller, if the tail is one way, and so forth. But with deep learning, what you do is switch it on its head, meaning instead of giving rules, you actually give data to the program, and you give what is the expected output. And through training, it generates its own rules. And the sort of the revolution with that is the world is extremely messy. Meaning, with that dog and cat example, there is a very small dog, and I wrote with the traditional software that if the body of that animal is small, then it will be a cat. But now that sort of rule has failed. So it's sort of impossible to capture all of the rules of the real world by just writing them by hands. Now, into the specifically detecting deepfakes, there are sort of multiple ways of doing that. And if you look at sort of what has been done in the industry, is mostly it has been approach of I'll train a big neural network and try to detect all kind of deepfakes. But that is a false premise. And the reason is because in cybersecurity, we know that only one layer of defense is not enough. And so there's a concept called defense in depth in cybersecurity. So you have, let's say, firewall, you have endpoint protection, you have IDS, IPS, meaning if an adversary is able to come to one layer, then there's a more high likelihood that he will be caught in the next one. And the same way we have, for example, modeled our own detection, meaning on layer one is basically we similar to what Facebook and other social media platforms do for their illicit visual media, such as child pornography, is we hash the videos. And even if the video is changed, then we still are able to capture them. So there's a probability matching there. And that basically, because of the hashing is a very cheap computation wise, and then it can be scaled to social media scale. And then there is second, third, and fourth layer being, we, for example, look at metadata forgeries, manipulations. Then we also pick up every frame from video. From that frame, detect faces and predict if any given face is a deepfake or not. And how that, in a sort of a very short form, is done is by training a neural network with a bunch of videos from videos that are deepfakes and videos that are real. And I'd like to also emphasize that actually detecting deepfakes, 80% is a data game. Meaning, if you look at Tesla and ask why Tesla is leading self-driving car in the world today, obviously there is sort of a, Waymo can totally level 5 self-driving in a closed environment in one part of the city. But in a general way, Tesla is leading because they have 99% of the data is owned by them. And so there is a long data distribution that you need to capture from a real world. For example, you have a pedestrian who is wearing a giraffe costume. But if there is no that kind of data, then a neural network has no clue what it actually is. And the same way, in order to detect deepfakes and to be able to generalize the detection to them, you have to be able to capture a wide variety of deepfakes. And the reason is because every deepfake is as like a little bit as a different malware, meaning we have hundreds, thousands, and a wide variety of different malware categories, families, and mutations. In the same way, deepfakes, basically when a deepfake is created, a lot of times the creator tweaks their own algorithms a little bit. So there is this kind of signal that is changed. Plus, every social media platform uses different kind of video encodings. So you have to be able to capture this data in the wild. And that's the sort of approach that we have taken is, we, from a detection side, a layered defense, plus capture the widest possible data distribution as deepfakes that are in the wild.
That's a fantastic description, Johannes. Thank you for that. You describe the deepfake technology and the detection technology in a dynamic similar to an arms race. I think you must mean that the creation technology is getting better and better, and then the detection technology, has to improve in order to get ahead of, stay ahead of the creation technology. Could you describe a little bit as to what are the improvements that are being made to deepfakes that you're seeing that are having to be you're having to develop new techniques or evolving your techniques for detecting it? Could you talk a little bit about that arms race?
That's a very good analogy. And from a sort of a creation side, if you look some of the biggest open source repositories in GitHub, where you can create your own deepfake. And one of them recently published a research paper. In the abstract, something that they mentioned was that we can even pass most of the detection methods. So before going into the technical details, I like to emphasize that there is this sort of I can motivation or a mindset. And the same mindset was in the beginning of the malware development years. The first malware was basically developed because hackers said, I can do it. So they did it. It wasn't because of financial motivation, but because they could do it. So there is this sort of different motivations behind the sort of the arms race. One is obviously, I can do that. Then there is obviously, evading detection methods with, for example, adversarial machine ML. So few methods are, basically trying to fool, for example, the face detection, meaning you inject specific pixels into the video and try to evade the face detection. So even if you have a deepfake there as a face, then the face detection doesn't even pick it up. Then there's obviously many different kinds of other adversarial machine learning model methods, and be for the sort of the nation states when they are developing their sort of called zero-day deepfakes. They will use those kind of methods when they have a very targeted attack against a specific target and to evade the detection. And there is on a sort of wider terms, the biggest aspect is that the quality has already sort of, if you look, let's say, deepfakes is a very young sort of market. It's basically 2.5 years. And the first use case was porn. And if you think about what was the first use case of internet, then it was also porn. So there's this kind of analogy here. And basically, sort of, it is a little bit the quality game. So now we have passed already the quality of fooling a human eye. There's also the aspect that there are main two categories of deepfakes. One is being face swap, where you take one person's face and basically copy paste it to another person's face. Then there's also something called facial reenactment or lip sync, where you take the original footage of a person, but you put new words into that person's mouth. And that is even actually harder to detect because the pixels that are modified by the deepfake are less. And mainly the detection, what it does on an image level is picks up the signal or the noise that is generated by a deepfake creation method.
Fascinating, Johannes. I'd like to transition into a discussion about what people are likely to be seeing with deepfakes over the next 6 months, 12 months, a couple of years. People tend to be concerned that there may be some kind of a 911 moment, or like a thermonuclear moment where a deep fake sparks some kind of a major event. So I would love to hear your thoughts about, what types of events that could be. But I know that you also have a thought that there may be a much bigger problem looming on the horizon relative to deep fakes. I'll let you take that in whatever direction you want to go.
We do know that the US elections are targeted by influence operations by China, Russia, North Korea, Iran. And we do also know that from the synthetic media creation side, China is leading that market. Secondly, what we know is that Russia is actively developing their own methods, capabilities in that space. For example, although this was a parody, but a deepfake of Donald Trump was created by Russia Today. And that is, and you can basically imagine what are the capabilities that their sort of intelligence agencies have. So there is this possibility that very close to the sort of in this short term, from the risks, if you think about it, there is this possibility in the US elections week before or this sort of critical period or after the elections when there is a lot of uncertainty, votes are still being counted, then a deepfake of either candidate could be released. So let's say, basically imagine Joe Biden saying a few days before elections, hey, I have a cancer, please don't vote for me. Or basically you don't even have to say that, please don't vote for me, because people will look at that and say, I'm not going to vote for a person who have to deal with health issues. So there is this is sort of a short-term risk of this kind of a nuclear bomb or 9/11 situation.
Right.
Now, we do have to sort of counter that. And even though we are sort of developing the technology side, then I do strongly believe that the best defense against that is aware and educated citizenship. And on a longer term, what does it mean for democracy and society when we can no longer understand what is real and not anymore? So is it going to be that people will lose trust in a lot of the information? Is it going to be that people will now actually look for more trusted media sources? Or is it going to be that people, if they, let's say, look at the video, audio, text, all of that, those kind of fully simulated events, then they just don't care if it confirms their biases. So this is a sort of a human problem and a society-wide problem. And that's a bigger risk, that we will have this kind of a slow trip of downsliding of democracy, because democracy's blood flow is trusted information.
Right. I'm as you were describing that possible future state, I was reminded of the Aldous Huxley book, Brave New World, where the population of a country or the world is lulled into some kind of complacency or some kind of a state where they are just disconnected, but blissfully disconnected from reality. And it seems like deep fakes could somehow play a part in that kind of dystopian future, potentially. Have you and your colleagues ever thought along those lines?
Absolutely. And if you look at what Soviet Union did, which, Estonia and my parents grew up in Soviet Union, is we obviously know it under the name of active measures, but it was also called ideological subversion. And the end game wasn't so much to, persuade or influence you to think one way or another, but to make sure that people will give up and that they will not believe anything. So that's also sort of the notion when information can be fully automated. At the moment, let's say you have 50-cent army in China, you have IRA in Russia, and many other state actors and even not state actors. Then producing information is expensive, and especially producing good information is expensive because, if you look at the Chinese influence operation, which they started, at the sort of the beginning of coronavirus, they aren't good. They are not up to the standard of Russia, for example. So this is sort of a multiplier, force multiplier for them and other actors, because you don't have to have 300 people sitting behind the table generating content, but you can do it automatically with algorithms.
Yeah. So could you run down for our audience? So which country currently would you say is the world leader? And that's probably not the best way to put it. Which country is the leading promulgator of deepfakes? That is, leading the deepfake technology creation race, would you say, currently?
Hands down in China. Okay. So it is their sort of long-term strategy as well. And it's also long-term strategy for their big tech companies, Tencent, Alibaba, and other ones. Mm-hmm. So that's laid out in their strategical plans. Mm-hmm. And also we have from the sort of the end consumer aspect, for example, the Reface app that actually comes from, if I'm not mistaken, from Ukraine, or either it was Ukraine or Belarus. So there's this kind of but that's from an end consumer level.
Right. Is there a difference? Do you see a difference in the way the Chinese are deploying deepfakes? Is there a certain use case that is typically Chinese compared to Russian as far as applying the technology in a disinformation campaign?
From China's side, what we do know is that they have deployed it for their internal usage, and also for basically, everything from end consumer consumption, from, let's say, non-malicious AI anchors where you can automate them, all the way up to, we had one case where there was an Uyghur poet who was thought to be killed by the Chinese BLA because he wrote against Chinese government, and he was thought to be killed after that. Now, a few months later, the Chinese national media releases a video where that same person, Uyghur poet, is sitting in front of a camera and saying, "Don't worry about me, I'm all fine. I'm operating with the government." One of our clients is that real, or is that the deepfake? Is it AI generated? And with sort of very high likelihood, what we found out it was real. So he was most likely tortured or subversive in other methods to say that. And also we have this is a good case study with the aspect that we've already passed the point where we can say if any given video, for example, is a deepfake or not. And by that, I mean on a binary scale with 100% certainty. Say with 100% certainty is if that given video would be, for example, hashed when at its point of capture. So, and you could basically check afterwards that it hasn't been manipulated. And now from Russia's side, basically there's a very also a large dark web market, and Russia is sort of very active. Russia's actors are very active in that market. So you could today already buy deepfakes of other people, buy disinformation campaigns, or sort of combination of them in a dark web market. And as well, the sort of the national media that has leveraged deepfakes as well.
Okay, great. I'd like to start transitioning and talk about some books or online materials that our audience can access should they want to learn more about deepfakes. Are there some materials that you could recommend that people check out that would help them understand at a deeper level, not to play on words there, the deepfake technology and some of the ramifications for the West?
We just released the most comprehensive report on the state of deepfakes. What is their growth? What are the sort of the threat landscape, and where is it all going? So, and that can be freely available on our homepage. So that would be the sentinel.ai. Okay. And from a book side, to sort of understand what is happening at the moment, especially with the sort of the ideological subversion and changing the perception of reality, I recommend a book called Disinformation by Ion Mihai Bashepa. And he is the most highest ranked Soypluk defector in sort of the intelligence aspect. And he sort of lays it exactly out. What did the Soviet Union did with their sort of disinformation operations campaigns, and what was sort of their approach to that? And if we sort of understand the history, then we can also start to predict or much better understand how will it sort of evolve as well.
All right. Well, thank you very much for that. We will have links to these resources on the show notes page, and we encourage everybody to go and check those out. And with that, Johannes Tammekänd, thank you very much for being on the Cognitive Crucible.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
The Cognitive Crucible is the only podcast dedicated to increasing interdisciplinary collaboration between information operations practitioners, scholars, and policymakers. To find out more about the Information Professionals Association, visit us at information-professionals.org. Please support our podcast by giving us a 5-star rating and leaving a review.